Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the world. At just 13 years old, Alexander accomplished something no one else could. A wild, untamable horse named Bucephalus had defeated every rider who tried to mount him. The animal reared, kicked, and threw grown men to the ground. No one could control him, but Alexander saw what others did not. He noticed the horse was terrified of its own shadow. Calmly, the boy turned Bucephalus toward the sun, spoke softly, and leapt onto his back. The horse obeyed. The crowd was stunned. The impossible had been done. King Philip II of Macedon, watching his son, is said to have embraced him and spoken words that would become legend. "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." Not long after, Alexander's education was entrusted to one of the greatest minds of the ancient world, Aristotle. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander studied philosophy, science, medicine, literature, and ethics. He learned to admire Homer, to question the nature of power, and to see conquest as more than simple violence. But Aristotle also taught him strategy, leadership, and the art of war. From that rare combination, a warrior's instinct and a philosopher's mind, a conqueror was forged who would one day change the world. The moment that changed everything came suddenly, and violently. In 336 BC, King Philip II of Macedon was assassinated during the wedding celebration of his daughter. In an instant, the most powerful ruler in Greece was dead, and his kingdom was left leaderless. Alexander was only 20 years old. Many believed the throne would not survive him. They were wrong. Within days, Alexander seized power, and just as quickly, he moved to eliminate every threat. Rebellions flared across Macedonia and Greece. Tribes in the north revolted. Greek city-states whispered of independence. Alexander responded with ruthless efficiency. He marched faster than any army expected. He struck without hesitation. Resistance was crushed before it could spread. The Greek city-states believed they could challenge the boy king. That youth meant weakness. That Macedonia would fracture without Philip. They were catastrophically wrong. When Thebes rose in open revolt, Alexander made an example that would echo for generations. The city was razed to the ground, its walls torn down, its people slaughtered or sold into slavery. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. The message was unmistakable: Greece would obey, or it would burn. From that moment on, no one doubted who ruled the Greek world. In 334 BC, Alexander made his move. With an army of just 35,000 men, he crossed the narrow waters of the Hellespont, leaving Europe behind and stepping onto Asian soil for the first time. As soon as he landed, Alexander performed a symbolic act meant to send a message to the world. He hurled his spear into the ground and declared Asia won by the spear. It was not just a gesture, it was a promise of conquest. Soon after, Alexander met the Persian satraps at the Granicus River. The enemy held the high ground. The river was deep, its banks steep, its current strong. His generals urged caution. Alexander ignored them. He led the charge personally, plunging into the river at the head of his cavalry. The battle dissolved into brutal, close-quarters fighting, steel against steel, horse against horse. At one moment, Alexander was struck and nearly killed in hand-to-hand combat, saved only by the desperate intervention of his companions. But when the fighting ended, the river ran red with Persian blood. The victory at Granicus was decisive. It proved something to both sides, that Alexander would not command from the rear, and that he was willing to risk his life to win an empire. When Alexander arrived in the city of Gordium, he was shown an ancient relic, the Gordian Knot. Legend claimed that the man who could untie it was destined to rule all of Asia. For generations, kings and conquerors had tried, and failed, the knot was impossibly tangled, its ends hidden, its logic unreadable, no solution revealed itself. Alexander studied it in silence, then, without hesitation, he drew his sword, and cut through the knot in a single stroke. The problem was not solved. It was ended. Some called it cheating, others called it brilliance, but for Alexander, it was neither. This was not cleverness, this was destiny asserting itself through action, and from that moment on, the message was clear: the rules that bound other men did not bind Alexander. October 1st, 331 BC, on the vast plains of Gaugamela, history was about to be rewritten. Alexander the Great faced the mightiest army the world had ever seen. Over 250,000 Persian soldiers under King Darius III stood against him, while Alexander commanded only 47,000 men. The battlefield stretched for miles, a sea of armor, chariots, and spears. Yet Alexander did not hesitate. He surveyed the enemy lines, organized his forces with unshakable precision, and prepared to strike. When the battle erupted, Alexander personally led the charge of his companion cavalry, slicing through the Persian lines like a blade of lightning. Chaos spread through Darius' army, fear spread faster. And then, the king himself fled. Darius abandoned the battlefield, leaving behind his empire, his family, and his dignity. By the end of the day, the unthinkable had happened. In a single, decisive battle, the Persian Empire, which had ruled for over 2 centuries, ceased to exist. Alexander had done the impossible. He had conquered the heart of Asia, and the world would never be the same. By the age of 30, Alexander the Great had achieved what no conqueror before him ever had. He shattered the Persian Empire, marched from Greece to the edge of India, and ruled most of the known world. But at the height of his power, in Babylon, everything came to an abrupt end. Alexander lay in bed, burning with fever, too weak to stand, his body slowly failing him. Around him gathered his closest companions, the generals who had fought at his side for more than a decade, men who commanded armies and governed vast territories. They understood one terrifying truth: an empire without a clear heir would not survive. So they asked the question that would decide the fate of the world. Who should inherit your empire? Alexander struggled to lift his head. His voice was barely a whisper, but his answer would echo for generations: to the strongest. 3 words. With those words, Alexander did not secure his legacy, he doomed it. Instead of unity, he left rivalry. Instead of order, chaos. His generals would soon turn on one another, plunging the empire into decades of brutal civil war, wars that would tear his creation apart and ensure that Alexander's empire would die with him. Legacy of fire. Alexander the Great did not leave behind a peaceful inheritance. He left behind fire. An empire forged through relentless conquest could not survive without the man who held it together. When Alexander died, there was no clear successor, only ambition, jealousy, and armies loyal to individual generals, not to an idea or a state. His final words ignited a chain reaction. Former brothers in arms became bitter rivals. Alliances shattered overnight. The generals who had conquered the world together now turned their weapons on each other. What followed were the wars of the Diadochi. Decades of brutal conflict that engulfed the empire from Macedonia to Egypt, from Anatolia to Mesopotamia. Cities burned. Kingdoms rose and fell. Entire regions were devastated in the struggle for power. In the end, Alexander's empire did not survive. It fractured into rival kingdoms: the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Asia, the Antigonids in Macedonia. Yet even as his political empire collapsed, something else endured: Greek language, culture, and ideas spread across 3 continents. Cities founded by Alexander became centers of learning, trade, and power. The Hellenistic world was born from the ashes of his conquests. Alexander's legacy was not peace, it was transformation through conflict, a legacy of ambition, a legacy of war, a legacy of fire that reshaped the ancient world forever.